understand that you are probably unfairly good at something and take the time to figure out what it is. And you're probably discounting it because the things that we were unfairly good at feel and look easy to us.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling Dev Tools. I'm joined today by Ellen Chisa. Ellen is one of my most requested guests and is a partner at Boldstart Ventures, a VC firm focused on enterprise companies at inception, including developer tooling and infrastructure. They invested in the likes of Sneak as well as Zooplo, who's been on the show. Prior to Boldstart, Ellen co-founded Dark along with the co-founder of CircleCI. Dark is an integrated programming language, editor, and PaaS that has been very influential in the developer tools ecosystem. Ellen has a background in product development at various companies, including Microsoft, Lola, and Kickstarter, and also sits on the board of Liveblocks. Ellen, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. I'm bummed that we're missing each other in London, but at least we get to do this.
Yes. We've kind of swapped sides of the Atlantic. So one of the things that we were talking about before is how many SDKs should a startup have?
If you want the spicy answer, the answer is one and always one. But of course, it's going to depend on what you think of as being a startup. And so for me, when founders are saying like, oh, I built this great tool, should I have made my SDK for Python? Should I make a bunch of other ones because that'll like juice my user numbers? The answer is usually just keep doing the one thing you are doing and do it well and reduce your hull speed as much as possible by keeping it narrow so you can keep iterating and making an experience better and better for those users, and just wait until people are banging down your door for the next one. Don't think of it as being something like, okay, well, I shipped Python, next week I ship an SDK for Ruby or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have to say, when we spoke about this, I found it interesting because I'd kind of committed the cardinal sin already where I'd emailed someone and they said, oh no, we use Python, so you don't have that. And then I was like, we'll build a Python SDK. And so how do you get past that kind of like temptation of just...
This is actually a really great meta question. And I think what it really comes down to is at some point you have to decide who you're building for and build for them. And so if you're saying, like, I guess in your case, you're building tooling around video streaming, you can kind of say, like, which developers who are building and need something for video stream am I focused in on? And are they people who are already using Python, or are they, what did you build the first version in again?
JavaScript.
JavaScript, yes. Or are they JavaScript people? And so if you've said like, hey, I'm building for JavaScript people, there's certainly enough JavaScript people in the world that you should be able to find a few who are excited about using it. And maybe you just got bad luck with the first person's a Python person, or they just happened to see it. But the limiting factor right now shouldn't be that there aren't enough JavaScript people in the world.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that, actually. And before when we were chatting, it's like, yeah, clearly that's not the problem.
It is really tempting, though, because like I think as founders and as builders, whenever someone comes in and is like, oh, I want to use your thing, I just need this one thing. You want to do them the favor. You want to make it so they can use it. And it emotionally can feel like the right choice, and emotionally can feel like, oh, I'm being responsive to my users, but they aren't your users yet until they're actually using it. And so that's like being responsive to your potential future users at the expense of the users you have today.
Yeah, that's something that we were speaking about as well. It's like you were talking about people that wanted like esoteric features that didn't really matter, and like it's so tempting to just help everyone and try and solve every problem.
Yeah, I think this is true if you're building a developer tool. This is also true no matter what you're building. At the end of the day, you only have so much time and so much like space, surface area in your product for what you can do. And so every time you say yes to something, you are implicitly saying no to a bunch of other things. And so I think people sometimes will like trick themselves into being like, oh, I just like always want to be the yes person. I always want to be helpful. I always want to be like going in this forward direction, and don't take into account that by saying yes, they're in fact also saying no 100 times because they're not saying it out loud. And if you kind of force yourself to say, okay, when I do this, this means I'm not doing these other 100 things on my to-do list, that makes it a little bit more clear what the trade-off is, and it doesn't feel as good to say yes.
Yeah. And how do you know if it's like a yes or a no?
I think that's hard. I think that's kind of building things is hard enough that I think that's kind of why we ended up with PMs, is everyone was like, okay, well, we can't just build everything. So we're going to like employ this entire class of people who decide if we should build something or not. But I think the closer you can get decisions, people are actually building, the better. And from that standpoint, I tend to think of it as what's going to have the highest impact. Some people say like you should have one North Star metric that you're going towards, and that's the thing you're trying to drive. And so everything you're looking at, you evaluate, does this hit my North Star metric or not? Sometimes for me, I'll use the Eisenhower matrix, which is like, is this important and is it urgent? And if it's important and urgent, I'm definitely going to do it. If it's important, I'm going to do it. If it's urgent, I might do it. And if it's not urgent and not important, I'm definitely not going to do it. So that's another way of looking at it. But at the end of the day, I think for every single thing I build or talk to someone about building, I think if we build this and it's successful, like what do I expect to happen after? And I should sort of have the hypothesis in mind at the time of building of what the impact is going to be. And if I don't have that, that probably isn't something I should build until I know what that hypothesis is.
Well, what do you do when you don't know what the hypothesis is?
I make one. So I guess like in this case of I have a JavaScript SDK, should I build a Python SDK? Say, I don't think this is the case, but pretend you'd had the JavaScript SDK for 3 months and no one's been using it. And you're kind of like, you know what? I think I've figured out that there are other better solutions for JavaScript users in this space. But I keep hearing from these Python people who really want an SDK. And I know I haven't gotten, say it's no users or say it's 5 users of this like original thing in 3 months. I'm going to do the work and I'm going to build the Python one. And if I see 10 users in the first week, or if I email everyone who's asked me about the Python one and they all sign up and start using it on day one, like that's enough of a success for me to go, oh, okay, I'm going to deprecate this JavaScript SDK. I'm not going to worry about that anymore. We're like all in on Python. And so like that's one way I would potentially think about it. Another one could be in even the same scenario, you could just say like, oh, I think I've tapped out the JavaScript market. I've been working on my product for the last 4 years, and I am the de facto answer for video processing for JavaScript developers. And I feel like there's not much to be gained, and like there's no more SEO I can do. There's no more events I can go to. I feel like I'm really limited in the JavaScript space. I want to move over and like open up, and I see there's like a lot of demand for similar problems in Python, and like now is the time for that. And I'm expecting that this will expand my user base in a way that shipping the next JavaScript feature wouldn't.
Yeah, that makes sense. That you're exhausting that well before you move on to the next one and like start trying to.
And it's sort of like it's a diminishing returns thing. Like I'm not saying you got to get every single JavaScript developer on earth before you decide to do something for Python, but I definitely see far more founders go the other way where they're like, okay, I'll build the JavaScript, I'll build the Python, I'll build the Ruby, I'll build something for Rust, I'll build something for Go, and wanting to cover the whole landscape right off the bat. And so I tend to push people in the opposite direction. Just focus on one thing and do the one thing well.
And I guess it's kind of almost like a trick where it's like, oh, you could just build an SDK and that might not take that long. You know, you could get a first version out, like depending on the product, like pretty fast. There's even tools that generate them, right? But then it's like, for me, I probably know I know most of the things that JavaScript developers read, and I know who's influential, and I know like the culture of the JavaScript world. But then if we wanted to build a Rust SDK, I don't know any of those things. And I feel like that must be part of it as well, of like stretching yourself.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think that's something a lot of people who haven't spent much time in the dev tools world miss is like developers are not a monolith at all. And like exactly what you're saying, like different communities have different norms and different ways they think about the products, and they have different tools they're already using. And so you're kind of fitting into a different tool stack depending on what community you're working with. I think that's very important to keep in mind, that it might not be just making an SDK. There might be a lot under the hood to really get that to take off.
And when you were talking about kind of having the North Star, could you give some examples of like what kind of things might be a good North Star?
Yeah, I think we got to this when I was thinking about like red flags and developer tooling companies. And one is definitely when people are like, oh, I just need one more SDK. Another one, like I've definitely fallen prey to this, is I think we tend to look at a lot of vanity metrics in developer tooling. And so like it's very tempting to be like, oh, we have so many like so many developers signed up, we have this many accounts. And at the end of the day, the number of developer accounts you have or the number of stars you have in GitHub doesn't really matter. All that really matters is developers who are actually using your product and getting value out of it on, I would say, a day-to-day basis. Obviously, there's like some nuance there where if you're in the workplace, maybe you're seeing daily active users between Monday and Friday and like a little bit of a drop on the weekend when people aren't at their day job, like that's fine. But looking at regular usage and regular value accrual to a developer wanting to come back and do it again is something that I think is definitely a very good North Star. Another one you mentioned at the beginning, my background's from consumer products, and I think there's actually a lot of overlap with consumer metrics and developer metrics. And so much like every time you buy a new product, they usually say like, hey, share your discount code with your friends so they get $20 off on this thing. And they want to see that referral number go up and you bringing more and more people in. The same thing is true in developer tooling, where you definitely want to see people saying, oh, I started using this. It's making me so much more productive. I want to tell my other 5 friends about this tool as well. And you want to see like that same sort of viral loop that you would see in a consumer product.
Yeah. Are there any kind of limits to that? Like, is it like, are there differences between consumers and developers, or is it?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that with consumer products, you're usually thinking about a specific purchase point where you're either like subscribing to a software application or like with direct to consumer stuff, you're buying a physical good that you consume. And that's the primary revenue driver. I would say with developer tooling businesses, more often you're not thinking about every single developer pays me $10 a month. Like there can be cases where that's true, but more often than not, I see the long-term business models for developer tooling companies lean much more enterprise-based, where at the end of the day, maybe there's an overlap with a security team, like Sneak obviously being an overlap between developer and security-oriented things. There's an overlap with like the CIO's office. And so there's some reason for a large company to be writing a 6-figure or a 5-figure contract to the company that isn't just $10 per developer on my team per month. It might have something more to do with tokens or with credits or with some sort of usage-based pricing.
Is it something that's clear at the beginning when you're starting out? Like, I don't know, with like Dark, were you thinking about like, what does this overlap with? Like, is it a CIO thing? Is it like a kind of...
Yeah, you're really getting me to hit all of the things that I feel like we all do and then go, ooh, shouldn't have done that one.
Sorry, Alice.
I know, it's great. I feel like another common one I see with developer tooling companies is we all know as developers that we pay for hosting. And it's like one of the things we're totally happy to pay for infrastructure. Like, oh yes, I'm paying for my cloud computers. That's fine. And so I think at the beginning of Dark, I was very much like, oh, great. In the like super long run, after Dark has fully replaced AWS, everyone will be paying us for infrastructure. But like, if you think about how long it's going to take a business to replace something like AWS, like that's a very long time. And that's a very deep relationship to overcome because every software company already has a big cloud contract that they're happy using. And so I would definitely say I wouldn't think of it off the bat as being like, hey, we're just going to charge for infrastructure. I would think of it much more as like, what are people no longer having to do because they have our tool? Like, what is the pain that they're avoiding because we exist?
What are like good examples of like those things?
I mean, I think I hate going to these because these are all like the super canonical ones, but obviously like Twilio before that to integrate with a telecommunications provider, like that was a huge hassle. Stripe, same thing with finance. I don't actually know if there's been one in the travel space yet, but integrating with the GDS systems for the back end of the travel industry, like the Amadeuses and the Sabres of the world, is actually quite difficult. I think I wouldn't work in the travel space again, partially for that reason.
Those are for like looking up like flights or something.
Yeah, flights and hotels. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then booking them after you've looked them up. And like ITA was another one that was acquired by Google, and that's what Google Flights is powered by. I don't know if anyone has tried to make a new developer-friendly version of that infrastructure. I don't know if that market would be large enough, but those are the sorts of things where I look at it and go like, oh yeah, there's like stuff out there that's still really painful to do as a developer. And so like there are interesting abstractions to be built there.
Does it have to be like this kind of complex? I guess those make the best businesses when it's like super complex.
I don't think it has to be super complex, but I would say super important and super painful. Like it has to be like people have to be very unsatisfied with the way they are doing it today, and they have to be like wanting to look and find a better solution for that.
Yeah. And how does it work if like, you know, for instance, like say like Zoopla or something, like So do you remember like the pain point that you were like excited about? Like,
Yeah. If you think about it, well, I'm like a big API person. I think the entire world is going towards APIs. I think that's even more true in our current era, where if you think about people are going to have agents of some sort taking actions autonomously, regardless of how hypey people are about AI or not. I think if you think that might happen, I think APIs are a great way to encourage more automation across the board. I think they're a great way to encourage more structured data. And so when I think about Zupolo, it was very much that the existing set of API gateway and infrastructure companies were very enterprise focused, but were very much like, okay, there's no like sign up and do it today button. It's like you're going to call and you're going to talk to a salesperson and you're going to have a demo. And there was a big gap in the market for a gateway where you had full programmability. You could build whatever features you wanted on top of it. You didn't have to adopt the whole thing out of the box. You could say like, okay, I'm going to start with just rate limiting, or I'm going to start with like, I want to add this one particular feature to it. And so I think the like level of configurability and the ease of getting started as an individual developer really stood out to me.
yeah. So it's like, it's not, it can be like the technology and actually like building the thing, but it could also be like the business model, like how it set up in like in that sense of like, because it sounds like a lot of the pain was just that you couldn't necessarily access it as a developer.
Yeah, that's definitely a case. I'm trying to think of other examples, or like Liveblocks you mentioned at the beginning. Building collaboration features into a product was something everyone was kind of doing from scratch. It was actually something we built in Dark for Dark. And like I believe that every product is something that every software product is something that multiple people are going to be kind of using and acting on the same data or needing to work together in some way. Like anything that's on the internet, anything that's hosted, you definitely are going to have to work with other people. And all of us rebuilding that same infrastructure over and over again just doesn't make sense. Like that's a table
Yeah.
stakes feature that we should all be able to use and stay focused on like our specific end users and the business value we can provide for them.
So when you have this kind of painful problem, how do you think that DevTools can learn from consumer facing companies in their marketing?
Yeah. This is also something I think is very interesting. We talked about it a little bit before with like developers using something and then referring other people to it is very similar to consumer virality. I also think there's something about the level of taste and kind of the set of adopters who come into a product over time. And I think most developer tools, like you'll get a couple influential people who use them early on. And those influential people, some of them end up getting hired to do DevRel, and some of them are just people who like are interesting people who have completely different jobs, who are connoisseurs of tooling. Will then influence other people to use those as well and help lend their credibility to a product. And I think it's very similar to consumer models. And I think it's because you are very much appealing to an individual. And I think it's also because you are very much appealing to a sense of identity. And so I think a lot of consumer products, it's like, oh, if you buy this kind of shoe, it says this about you as a runner. Like you're not out there wearing Vaporflies if you're like the casual jogger doing a 5K once a week. You're wearing Vaporflies of like you want to be fast in your race. And I think that's the same way developer tools feel. And so like if I think about things like, would we consider Raycast like, I don't know if I would consider Raycast a developer tool or if I would consider it a SaaS application. But when you think about that, it's kind of saying you're the person who cares about optimizing your own desktop and optimizing your workflow and being able to fully customize it. And I think that's like the sort of mindset that would appeal to a lot of developers. Or like Obsidian, you're saying, I care about my software being more open. And so like it definitely says something different about you if you're an Obsidian user who's writing your own plugins than if you're, say, a Notion user. And so I think a lot of developer tools have the same brand and feeling associated with them and the same identity creation that consumer products do as well. And so I think it's important to be mindful of that. On one hand, you have this very pragmatic, this is the pain I'm overcoming and this is why. And on the other hand, you have like this aesthetic brand. This is what it's saying about someone when they're a user of our product. And this is what message they're conveying outwards to people when they're referring people to our tool.
And like, how do you, if you're a small startup, how do you make sure that you encourage an identity, or like, how do you go about that? If you're, you know, if you're not Raycast, you're starting from day one, how do you?
Yeah. I honestly think this is like one of the hardest things to teach. Like, I think this is something that very authentically comes from a founder. Like, at the end of the day, when you're building a product, when you're building a company, your company's going to feel like you. This is like another painful thing I think about being a founder is whatever you think your flaws are as a person, you will see them reflected back to you in your company like 1,000-fold in like a much worse way than you thought. Uh, and so like, I don't know if there's really any way around that. And so I think the easiest way to get that out there and get that in the ethos is like being out there with your product. Like, I think another problem I see come up sometimes is founders saying like, oh, I built it and like I want to raise VC so someone like I can hire a salesperson and they'll sell it. And like that's just not how things get adopted most of the time. At the end of the day, like you, the maker of the thing, care the most about it. And so maybe you're talking about that online. Maybe you're having a podcast and that gets people to hear about it. Maybe you're going to like every meetup on the topic because you're excited to talk to other people with the same problem. But at the end of the day, however you authentically talk about the thing you've built, like that's what's going to make that like brand feeling around it.
It's really interesting to hear you say this because it's kind of how I've been thinking about it as with the people that I interview. It's like, it seems like ultimately when you drill down to like, why is your company good at this thing? It's usually because the founder is obsessed with it.
Yeah, for sure. Like when I think about Josh Twisted Zuplo, I think about someone who's obsessed, and Nate, his co-founder, like people who are obsessed with a great developer experience who've been thinking about that for a decade of their careers. Or when I think about Steven at Liveblocks and Guillaume, they both work together on Envision, which is a design tool. And so like they perfectly marry good developer abstractions with like their design engineers, I think are the best of anywhere. If you look at like every blog post they write, the like amount of craft that goes into it and like the quality, if you're just like the visual experience of looking at it, it's unparalleled. And like, I don't know, that's not something I'm good at. Like I can barely, like I know it when I see it, but I could never make it happen the way that they can. And like I love seeing founders who are spiky like that, who have that one thing that they are amazing at, and it comes through in their product and it comes through in all their work and it comes through in their team. And I love that consistency.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I'm wondering what the kind of like the lesson is, like where we can like, okay, so how do we figure out what, you know, because we can't obviously be someone else. So it's like, how do we? Can't. Yeah, no, I was just trying to bring it back to like from the deterministic, like, okay, you must be good, you must be great.
No, it's nothing I think it's that you should understand that you were probably unfairly good at something and take the time to figure out what it is. And you're probably discounting it because the things that we were unfairly good at feel and look easy to us.
That's so true.
And so I think it's kind of like it's not cheating. Like use that to your advantage with your tool as much as you can.
Yeah.
Mine was very much like I love thinking about one workflow and thinking about one example. And so like there's a 10-minute demo of me building an office sign-in application in Dark that we used to do our launch demo.
I was watching this before the show.
Yeah, that
you
demo.
You did it in one take.
I did it in one take. That's like very much my style. It also was probably best on the first take. I don't know if that one was the first one, but it was definitely best at the beginning. But like I just did that in every single meeting with people for like a year before I got to that. And like I would like watch and see how people reacted and see like what moments people really needed to have hit to understand it. That was fun. That was so much fun for me. And so like I feel like that was like a little bit of an unfair thing, is like you can make a really cool demo if you love showing what you're building to someone every day and you love like slightly refining the script to try to get like maximum dopamine hit out of watching someone else react to it. I don't know if this is good or bad things about me, but it was really fun.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how did you figure out? Was it just like do you remember like thinking, oh, I'm good at this? Like, was it?
No, I remember thinking, oh, this is terrible. Half the people, like most of the people I talk to are much better software engineers than I am. And they're asking me these questions that I like don't necessarily know the answers to, because they would just be coming from like a different worldview or a different set of lived experiences as a developer. And so I learned a lot from every single person I talked to. And so I guess maybe the thing I was good at was kind of going through that and not mind being embarrassed a lot of the time.
That's a very good trait. That's a really, really good trait. Yeah, that makes sense. And then how were you able to like kind of I guess you did realize that was like a working way. Like how did you kind of bring that, use it as like to your advantage?
I did a lot. Like, I'm not sure if this is answering exactly what you asked, but I did a lot of pair programming with people. So like that demo is the standalone version, but apart from that demo, the thing that existed kind of simultaneous or like contemporaneously with that was I would like get on the phone with someone and be like, what do you want to build? And then we would pair them hands on keyboard to build in Dark together.
Which I guess taught you a ton of like how they would use it.
Yeah, it taught me a lot of like, what do they want to build based on what
Yeah.
we've put into the universe? What do they think they should be trying to build here? It taught me a lot about how people had different styles for how they wanted to like think about their application. And if they wanted to start from a template, or if they had like this thing they always built, and was it like a coding question, or was it a specific demo application they liked? It taught me a ton about that. It taught me a ton about usability and ergonomics, and like whenever someone would like the editor in Dark was structured at first, and like every time someone could not deal with a structured editor, that was really interesting. It definitely showed me that people who loved Dark were either relatively inexperienced programmers who were just excited to try something out, and like the structured editor really supported them, or people who tried every single new tool and thus were like very mentally flexible. And the people who struggled the most were definitely people who were like, I've been an ex developer for the last 15 years and I am amazing at it. And like those people I was pulling way too far out of their world to have it go well. It was always really painful for both of us.
Yeah, but it didn't stop you. Yeah.
No, but it did mean that like I then tried to narrow in on more of kind of the people on the other sides of the spectrum. Like you don't want to be dropping people into a product that you know isn't going to work for them.
Yeah. So how did you adjust the kind of strategy?
I mean, definitely. And that I'm trying to is a while ago now, but I think a large chunk of that was me saying like, okay, the type of people who are going to succeed are the people who have an application and they know what they want to build and they are ready to build it kind of trace in. So like one of the other features of Dark was we called it trace driven development, but it was basically the idea of like you would send a post request to an API and then build the API logic after. And so I started kind of screening out of like, okay, do these people have an API they want to build? And can I imagine the shape of the post request we would send to it? And can I kind of scaffold out in my head what our application would look like after that? And then I would also specifically, one of the things I found that people could build an entire application when they were on the phone with me. But then the challenge of that was like, okay, they're done building. They don't need to do anything else. There was no reason for them to come back and build again. So that wasn't really great from my perspective. So looking at things where I was like, okay, how far can we go today? And then cut ourselves off. So like they're coming back to finish this without me.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the things that you had a background where at some point you were teaching, right? You were teaching at General Assembly.
Yeah. Yes. I kind of think of my personal mission as I like helping people make things. And that can be like, I love giving people capital. And I've done that in a bunch of different ways. I love teaching people things. Then I also love making tools that help people make things. And so, yeah, like teaching is one of those three prongs for me.
Yeah. And do you think that there were things that you took from that experience into being a founder?
I think there certainly were. It's actually quite hard for me to say. I also went to an engineering school called Olin College of Engineering that when I went there were the first alumni had just finished and we were unaccredited. And so I went to like a purely experimental college. And so I think
cool.
Thinking about pedagogy and how people learn comes very naturally to me because of that. And so I think it's just so deeply infused into who I am at this point that I don't actually know how it impacts things.
Very interesting. Yeah, I remember you asked me when we first spoke about how do I, because I said I was trying to like learn in this podcast and how do I actually reinforce it. And it sounds like, yeah, you're always thinking about, I imagine you were thinking about like, I don't know, does he write flashcards or does he do this?
I think it was a little bit of a selfishly motivated question. One of the best parts of being an investor is that you get to meet lots of interesting people every day and you learn lots of little bits of content. And I think it's like hard to say, like, if you talk to 8 awesome people, how do you make sure you actually, I think them giving me the time is like such a sign of respect that I'm like, okay, you've given me this gift of time and the gift of your insights. I want to keep track of them well. And then I want to, when possible, like pay them forward to other people. So like those ideas keep getting into the world and like keeping track of everything so you can do that other than just doing it organically. I would like more better ways to do that.
Interesting. And so being an investor, yeah, I think you mentioned before that it's like lots of different work, or maybe like less focused deep work and more conversations. And and also something else you've said is that there's power in busy work, and I'm not so.
I think one of the interesting things about being an investor is usually no matter who you're talking to, they know more about the space that they're specifically working on than you do. Like as a founder of something, you probably have spent the most hours in the entire world thinking about that specific thing, which I think is awesome. And like I loved being that for Dark. And that's probably the thing I miss the most about being a founder. And so I think when you're thinking about investors, it's very tempting to be like, oh, like Ellen was on the Scaling DevTools podcast. She said all the stuff about building DevTools. She knows like more than I do about this thing. And like, that is definitely not true. Like every founder knows more about their space than an investor would. And so it's important to be able to kind of take from investors what are the patterns they've seen or what are things that might be useful to you. But at the end of the day, the founder kind of decides like, what is useful to my business here and how does like this broader experience apply to my situation? Yeah, it's a very different kind of thing.
Yeah, and why is busy work important?
I think about this a lot. I've been thinking about this a lot lately.
Yeah. Also, what is busy work actually? Just
okay. I feel like to some extent we all like we want to be doing work, and I think all of us enjoy the creative process of doing work. And so like if you talk about people like getting into flow and like writing a bunch of code, like that's one format of it. Like you could have the architecture in your head, but you can't just magically turn that into a fully functional program. And I don't think most people want to. And then the same way we'll talk about like, oh, the hard work of say being a staff level engineer is like the talking to the different teams and the coordinating the different people together, which is much more PM like in a lot of ways. And I think that is also a form of like, we're doing this activity to eventually get to a form of creation. But if it was just like, you could snap your fingers and all of the teams just agreed, I don't think anyone would find that a very enjoyable job. And so I think to some extent, when we were building and like when we are consumers of tools, like we want to feel like things are like hard enough, but not too hard. And we want to like consistently be like applying effort to something. I think most people at the end of the day don't want to go like full. I guess it depends. I think most software engineers at the end of the day don't want to go full 4-hour work week. Like I think a lot of us do this work because we enjoy the craft of doing the work. I'm sure someone's going to come and be like, no, you're wrong. We all don't. It's me. I enjoy the craft of the work. Probably some of the people who listen. And so I think that's important. And I think that's kind of true, regardless of the role you're in. If you're a software engineer, if you're an investor, there are definitely things I do that aren't like the like, oh, this is the magic moment. I found the founder. We're going to do the round now. There's like a lot of like listening to people and talking to them and then sitting by myself for half an hour while I like try to explain to someone why I'm passing on their company. And so like there's a lot of that work that comes in. And I think that's like a big part of how we eventually have ideas and insights as well. It's just kind of all of that interstitial time of doing things.
Yeah. So it's kind of a like they're really valuable and then also make life enjoyable.
Yeah. I don't know if that was like a well fleshed out thought yet, but if other people have kind of been thinking about that, I'd be happy to hear from them and talk more about it because it's just something that's kind of been stewing on lately.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah. If things are too easy and kind of can just be achieved sat in front of your computer at home, maybe it's I mean, obviously there's a lot of joy can be had there, but I feel like it's most of the hard things involve leaving your desk and talking to people and persuading people and
being rejected by people. Being told by people you're stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So one thing I wanted to ask you is now that you are investing in developer tools, having built a developer tool, what do you think you look for that's different from what most investors might look for?
I don't quite know how to articulate this, but like I definitely, for better or for worse, investors talk a lot about how like you think about people and you think about market. And I definitely think about people and I think about market, but I learn about people and market by talking to people about their products. And so I think like I spend an unusual amount of time talking to people about like, what have you built? Why have you built it this way? And not because I think the version of the product that exists is the one that's going to exist forever. Or like I'm trying to judge if it's a good or a bad product. I like use the product as a lens to talk to people and understand like who they are and what they're motivated by and why they're doing this and where they want to go in the long run. And I think for a lot of developers and a lot of product people, the product is kind of like a manifestation of like our ideas that we have made. Like it's kind of like art in a way. And it's like the version of the art that you've put in the world to like be able to interact with. And I think it's like the best thing to interact with to understand how a founder's thinking about their company.
Yeah, I think that I really resonate with that. I think preparing for the interviews, I kind of do the same thing of not talking, but just trying it out, and it reflects personality a bit as well. Yeah, that's a really good point. And are there any companies that you're very excited about at the moment?
Oh man, that's like having favorite shows.
By the way, you're going to say a lot, and then why don't you just say everyone that you're excited about, and I'll just randomly edit.
No, I think since we already talked about them, I'm always excited about Liveblocks. They just had their 2.0 launch recently. One of the things I love about them is like they do a really great job of speaking to developers and making really usable tools for developers to adopt, while also speaking at a high level to a PM or to a business lead about why they would care about what Liveblocks is building and why they would care about it being a developer-friendly product. I think they've done that extremely nicely. Similarly, I really admire the Zuplo team for taking a category that people kind of thought was like played out or a little bit boring and saying like, no, this like really like it is infrastructure, but this can be infrastructure for developers. And I think that's something that like I really admire about them and about their experience. So those are definitely two that came out today. And like, I'll just like re-echo that they're two that I'm excited about.
Yeah. That's very, very smart way to do it.
Easy, you picked it.
Yeah. Exactly. They're my two favorites of your portfolio, probably. Well, Zuplo is probably my favorite because they've been on the show.
We'll have to send you more.
Yeah, send them over. Actually, one thing that one last question is you mentioned about Liveblocks marketing to multiple kind of people, not just developers that care about Liveblocks. Have you seen any things that work well, especially at the early stages when you have that challenge?
Yeah, I think it's really about segmenting your message depending on who you're talking to. Like if you go to a JavaScript conference and talk at like a very high level about the future of collaboration, like it's not gonna resonate. Whereas if you go talk to a CIO about Zustand, probably also not gonna resonate. They're gonna be like, what's that? I've never heard of it. Why are we in the weeds here? And so I think it's really about nailing your message by the audience that you're talking to.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Amazing. Ellen, I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining. And thanks everyone who recommended that Ellen come on the show. And where can people learn more about you and about Boldstart?
Yeah, you can find more about us at Boldstart, especially if you're thinking about starting a company. There's no real too early to meet us. We like talking about people about the problems they want to solve and their hypothesis for how they're going to solve it first. But we're at boldstart.vc. I'm Ellen at boldstart.vc. You can Google me. I'm Ellen Chisa pretty much everywhere on the internet. I'm easy to find.
Amazing. Thanks, Ellen, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for having me.